It is now 2026, and the Miami Hurricanes are still playing college football, now just one win away from playing in a national championship in their own backyard after shocking the world and body bagging the defending national champions in the Ohio State Buckeyes 24-14 in the Cotton Bowl. Welcome back to the Teammate Sportscast. I'm Liam Hickey, joined alongside by Miami's WVUM radio broadcaster and UMTV's In the Trenches host, Luca Mucciardi, who was also there at Ground Zero at AT&T Stadium on New Year's Eve to watch the Hurricanes make history. Luca, take me back to that New Year's Eve. You're on the field as the game clock strikes midnight, orange and green confetti falling from the rafters. What was that experience like?
Listen, not a feeling in the world to describe it. I mean, that's a way to spend a New Year's Eve, I gotta say. Uh, Last 5 minutes of the game, run down to the field. You see that tunnel screen to CJ Daniels. He fights for a first, and you start thinking, wow, this is real. You're coming out of the 2 minute timeout, and then Marty Brown punches it in, and the place explodes. Jacoby Thomas the pick to seal it, and then before I know it, I'm running onto the field, and I'm running up to Jimmy Johnson and shaking his hand and saying, Let's go to the Fiesta Bowl." So I mean, just a wild experience all around, and something you only dream of as a fan, and something you only dream of as someone who works in media. So I mean, just awesome experience at the Cotton Bowl. Couldn't have asked for it to go any better.
And just talking about that atmosphere, you're up there in the press box doing media forward. I was in the fan section. On behalf of myself and surely all the Canes fans that were there as well, easily the most cathartic experience of my entire lifetime watching a sporting event, and probably the most sheer euphoria I've ever felt in my life just in general. And I just want to give some props to the fans here because they've been criticized before for a lack of attendance, which is understandable due to location circumstances of Hard Rock that's out of their control. But in this game, they showed out in a big way on New Year's Eve. The Miami side was deafening. I'd say they were way louder than the Ohio State Buckeyes fans, and at times drowned out their chants. They were doing the OHIO
I was
thing.
about to say, yeah.
Miami was booing so loudly. I don't even think the players on Ohio State's bench heard the fans behind them. It was insane. And they say, I think it was a 54-46 split in favor of the Buckeyes. What matters most was that it was basically a 100-0 split, but with less than a minute left to go because Miami had taken care of business and there's nothing left to see. All Ohio State could do was just get in their Ubers and get to the after parties before it was too late and they're beating traffic. So that's what matters most. And I'd say the fans and the player performances were probably complementary to one another because after a big special teams play, for example, for Miami, the players would go run to the fan section. They would go amp up the crowd. And then that in turn would give the Miami bench more juice because the fans would get into it. The Canes would get more physical. And all this energy just kind of rolled into this giant snowball going down the Swiss Alp. It was insane. It was electric. And that stadium, by the way, in
Yep.
terms of Jerry World in and of itself, I
Top
mean,
tier.
insane.
Top tier, top tier. I'd never been in a stadium like that. That was, so, I mean, you walk in there and you're just so impressed right away. I mean, that place is an absolute gem of a stadium. And I mean, you talk about the Miami fans, and I think that Ohio State fans kind of walked in with that swagger of, we're the 2 seed, we're reigning champs, we're playing the 10, we're gonna dominate Miami. Like this is not a game that they were worried about. They were already looking ahead and saying, all right, Georgia, all right, Ole Miss, like we're ready to play you next week in Arizona. And I think Miami fans kind of walked in there with that idea of, look, everybody counted this out. We went and got a win on the road, so why not us? That kind of just, we're playing with house money kind of thing. Let's just go enjoy this experience and playing in front of this crowd and playing on national television. You're the only game on. The whole world is watching. And they walked in there and they were loud and they were in there early. I mean, I was on the field 2 hours pregame, and the Miami fans were already crowding onto the sideline to try to get pictures, try to talk to players. So, I mean, you can't knock this fan base and the hustle that they showed last week in Dallas, and I'm sure this week coming up in Phoenix, it's going to be the same thing. I mean, this is a truly passionate fan base that has been longing for a run like this for 25 years now. And this is not only just that generation that remembers those teams of the 90s and the 2000s, but now their kids are getting involved in it. And it's our generation, like me and you, who are now being able to grow up in this time of, the Canes are back. And this is a team that now is, one game away from playing a national championship at home. I think it's kind of just the perfect storm for this fan base right now in this day and age of college football.
People call the Rose Bowl a cathedral rooted in this timeless tradition and history, but the Cotton Bowl with AT&T Stadium is a spaceship. It's a place that's meant purely for football, built like a football and houses America's team. I mean, you got remote controlled blimps flying around, Ford F-150s stacked on top of one another. It's an epic place where it's this dome atmosphere that feels so intimate that it creates this kind of perfect feeling of controlled chaos that is just so epic. And like you said, as these young Miami fans, we are so lucky. And this win means so much to this program on a historical level. Talking about the magnitude of this win itself, Miami, in my opinion, is probably rewriting the narrative as a national contender now. I mean, that A&M win proved that they can compete with the major dominant forces of college football, but this Ohio State win proved that they are now one of the teams, one of the national powerhouses on this entire college football landscape now, because this was a win that was program defining in this new era of NIL where players are no longer being paid under the table by the top powerhouses like Ohio State, Georgia, Alabama. Everything is kind of level now. The playing field is at an all-time plateau. And it's worked out so beautifully for these teams that are investing smartly into their organization, such as Indiana, Texas Tech, Miami, all the teams that have made it far now into the college football playoff. It's this changing of the guard moment when it's great to see. And Miami is definitely at the epicenter of it all as well.
Well, you know what? In the last decade or even 15 to 20 years of college football, you look back at the teams that were the most successful. You look back at, the Ohio States, the Alabamas, even the Clemsons of the world. And these were teams that, because they were winning, the players were coming. It wasn't about how much they were going to pay, how much NIL money they were going to be able to, or how much incentive they were able to be able to give. It was more, Ohio State has won 3 national championships in the last 10 years. I want to go play for Ohio State if I'm a 5-star recruit. That whole world is changing now, and that whole world is changing because of NIL. Look at the transfer portal right now. I mean, there's some craziness. You look at Sam Levitt, and he's now he's getting crystal ball to Kentucky potentially out of nowhere, and it's one of those things where it's just the incentives. But what Miami does right now, and what they have been doing so far with Mario Cristobal in the last couple of years, is their recruiting has been fantastic. They brought in Cam Ward last year. We all saw what he did. He becomes the #1 overall pick. They bring in Carson Beck this year. They get him to leave Georgia. They give him what's listed as a $6 million NIL incentive, and he decides to come to Miami and plays his heart out and gets them to a national semifinal. Now, it's one of those things where the money is one thing, but then when you can win on the biggest stage, when you can show the world that you can win when it matters, that's the second part of it that I think it just makes Miami now such an attractive place to be. You see the talent that's coming here, one, guys like Malachi Tony, who are, foregoing a year of high school to come play. And then you see where the guys are going after they leave Miami. You look at the Cam Wards, like I said, even Elijah Arroyo, who had a great year in Seattle with the Seahawks this year. Greg Rousseau has been balling in Buffalo. And it's kind of just this snowball effect that you were talking about where Miami is becoming one of those destinations that I think after this year's performance, it's just going to be one of those spots where guys are going to want to come to play, and they're going to want to play for a coach like Mario Cristobal.
Carson Beck worth every penny. And I know some fans, now that we're officially 3 days into the transfer portal opening for this year, getting a little anxiety. They see programs like Texas Tech and Indiana already making big splashes. I have the utmost trust in the staff in Mario Cristobal. They have a plan in place. Let's let them do their magic. Carson Beck was a late find anyway. We're not going to probably get a guy at the beginning of this transfer portal cycle. Maybe our guy isn't even in the cycle yet. So let's just have some patience and let's focus on Ole Miss. But talking more about Mario Cristobal and the significance of this win for him, this is a big monkey off the back moment. And if there's one word I could use to describe it for him and the university, it's vindication. Vindication against those who didn't believe in his vision. Vindication against those who criticized him as a coach that could never win a game of this gravity. And it's also vindication for the crib, for South Florida, because the players who stuck around from this area in the recruiting class of December 2022, watching a train wreck of a season that featured a loss to Middle Tennessee State, 3 blowout losses to Pittsburgh, Florida State, and Clemson at the end of that year, that was in total a 5-win season. They are now the pillars of this team's success. Ruben Bain, Francis Mauigoa, and Mark Fletcher, and now it's all paid
Yep.
off for them. Ruben Bain, obviously Defensive Player of the Year for the ACC and an All-American. Mauigoa, also an All-American and going to be a top 10 NFL draft pick. And then Mark Fletcher, a man that could have gone to Ohio State at a time when they were flourishing, had an 11-win season, but instead believed in Mario Cristobal's plan and decided to represent his home. And now, because of that and their decisions to stay loyal, they will all be etched into Miami history for this monumental milestone. And it makes it even more bittersweet of the team they did it against, because The players that they were on the other side of the field with made the opposite decision, and you could see how it backfired on them. J.J. Smith, Keanu Jackson Jr., Brandon Inniss, these are all also South Florida guys, and they unfortunately lost to the team that believed in Mario Cristobal when they were the team that didn't.
Well, look, Mario Cristobal coming out of Oregon, he came to Miami, of course, won a national championship as a player at Miami. And the whole idea was he's not a big game coach. He can't win the big game. And then you look at his first couple of seasons. That first year was rough. Then, the Georgia Tech game from 2 years ago where he hands the ball off instead of taking the knee and they end up losing. They were ranked at that point, and that the whole season kind of derailed from there. He wasn't a big game coach. It's what everyone said. He starts the year off this year against a top 10 Notre Dame team at home, a team that they haven't played since 2017. And although the scoreline was tight at the end and Carter Davis makes that field goal to win it, that was a dominant performance. You watch the first 3 quarters of that game, and that was the best Miami football you've seen in maybe since 2017. And then they keep going on that and they keep winning. And then they play Florida and it's game day and there's all this hype around it and they wipe the floor with the Gators for the second year in a row. And then again, it keeps snowballing. USF came in as a ranked team and they get a win. You end up getting the losses to SMU and Louisville. And then it's again, can Mario win the big game? Can he get it done when it matters most? Proving it again, though, in the playoffs. The playoffs is a different beast. I don't care what sport you're talking about. And the best of the best are able to win when it matters. He goes to Texas A&M in front of 107,000 people and beats what was the most high-powered offense in the SEC. And then he goes to a neutral site and beats Ohio State, like you said, with guys like Brandon Inniss, like Jeremiah Smith, who are South Florida kids who very well could have committed to Miami and bought into the program. And instead, he says, you know what? You didn't want to buy in, so now you're going to have to watch us next week. And it's just that idea. Cristobal has figured out his identity as a team. And he took 2 or 3 years, but he built from the inside out. And he built from between the tackles and in those trenches. And his front seven and on the offensive side and on the defensive side is just they can compete with anybody in the country. He's an offensive lineman at the end of the day. You got to remember that. That's where he knows how to win. That's where he won as a player. That's where he's winning as a coach. And it's this brand new culture in South Florida that you just love to see.
And it really feels like the sky's the limit at the moment because if you look at it from the macro, this was supposed to be a foundational year, maybe even a year where they take a few steps back because they lose the number one overall pick in Cam Ward. Instead, now, Mario Cristobal, when he's going, he's already been an excellent recruiter, but now when he talks to these kids from here on out, he now has a proof of concept. He doesn't just have to sell them on a vision. He already has the vision in place. It's already become a reality. And so kids in the past, when Miami's trying to tap into the deepest talent pool in all of America in South Florida, they were given a reason to not go to Miami. They wanted to, but over the past 20 years, Miami didn't give them a reason to. Well, now that's void. That's not existent anymore. Miami is, once again, one of the national contenders, reestablishing themselves as one of the top brands in all of college football. And that is just going to pay dividends to Miami, who is home to maybe one of the most ideal spots in all of America for college football talent.
Yeah, I mean, look at South Florida. Look at high school football in South Florida. Go watch any game. You're going to sit there and you're going to see 3 guys that you're just so beyond impressed. And then you're going to find out that, oh, they're a 3-star recruit. And you're like, how is that kid a 3-star recruit? South Florida is the prime location for some of the best football players ever. Again, look back at those Miami Hurricanes teams of old and how that state of Miami that they built. And it all started way back in the day with Coach Schnellenberger, and he said, we're going to cut the line at Orlando, and everything south of Orlando belongs to us. Palm Beach County, Dade County, Broward County, Homestead, everything there, that's all us. That's going to be all Hurricanes. And it's exactly what they did. They recruited these guys. Michael Irvin is from Overtown. He grew up 20 minutes from campus. That's the type of guy they bring in. Frank Gore went to Coral Gables High School. I mean, around the corner from campus. And they bring him in, and he becomes a stud at Miami. It's just that idea that Mario Cristobal's trying to bring back. And now you look at the guys that he was able to bring in. JoJo Trader was a highly touted recruit out of Chaminade Madonna. You get Malachi Tony coming out of STA. These are guys that are from South Florida. Reuben Bain, even a kid from South Florida that want to come play at Miami. And you combine them with some of those transfers he brings in, unsung heroes, guys like Keelan Marion, who I think has been probably the most underappreciated player on this team all year. It's just that perfect storm kind of thing. I don't want to, kind of play on the idea of a hurricane, but it is. It's a perfect
Yeah.
storm of talent coming into Miami right now. It's just really fun to see.
And let's get into that personnel group that Miami has because they're the reason Miami won this game. And starting with how they won with physicality. This was probably the biggest reason as to why Miami came out on top because of their line of scrimmage dominance. They bullied Ohio State both on the offensive line and the defensive line as well, controlling the game and the tempo because of it. And they had a great run game, which was not expected, but they did. And talking about maybe this defensive line first, this front seven, led by Bane and Messidor against Ohio State's O line, they put on another show. Unsurprisingly, but still, it was incredible to watch in person. Bain led the team with an 83.5 PFF grade, had one sack, six QB pressures, which was the most out of any rusher in this entire round of college football playoffs. He was great all game at setting the edge. He had that amazing rep at the beginning of the game where Bo Jackson was trying to bounce to the edge, and then he was able to wrap him around with one hand while being having another guy in his other hand, a whole offensive tackle, took both down to the ground. That's just the Ruben Bain experience, and it's incredible to just see him live because I don't believe anything they say about this short arm length and him not being a great NFL prospect. Have they considered that he has rabies? This guy is just unstoppable. It's insane. And Keith Mesidor as well. 74.8 PFF grade, two sacks, two tackles for loss, five solo tackles. Together over their last two games, they have had 33 pressures combined and seven sacks. I mean, guys aren't even getting that over a whole season. These guys are doing it against two of the best offenses in the country.
And look, I was out on the field pregame, and you see Bain and Mesidor, they stay on the field while the rest of the team goes to the locker room for 10 minutes just to run reps on their own. You have never seen a guy of that stature, talking about either of them, move the way that they do. I mean, they're hitting the pads, and it sounds like gunfire. It's the craziest experience. But then you watch them do it on the field and you see where that intensity comes from. It starts 3 hours before the game. It starts a week before the game. I mean, the joke has been all season. What's Ruben Bain's notebook gonna say every week? You know what I mean? I can't wait to see what his notebook's gonna say. But it's just that intensity that they bring onto the playing field that allows them to be that successful. And then again, you're playing against Julian Sang. You're playing against an O line that hasn't let him get touched all year. Julian Saint barely got sacked all season. And then the two of them show up for a couple of sacks each. Marquise Lightfoot, who goes under the radar because you don't think, oh, Marquise Lightfoot. You thought, Bain had a couple sacks. Mesidor had two sacks. Lightfoot got in there a couple of times and even helped to force the interception at the end of the game along with Bain. So that front seven for Miami is just one of the most dangerous, if not the most dangerous in college football, I think, right now. They took Marcel Reed off his game. They took a Heisman finalist in Julian Saint completely off his game. I mean, he was rattled. He looked like he was stumbling. It looked like he was losing his footing. He didn't know where his reads were. And that's just that idea of, the way to win in the playoffs, in my opinion, and what I've always said is you hit the quarterback. And that's exactly what Miami did the entire game. Now you look ahead at Ole Miss, and it's again, can you hit the quarterback? Can you get to Trinidad? I mean, you got to trust Bain and Mesidor to do their job with the way they've done it the last 2 weeks.
Yeah, they're going to need to get home with four, and it's going to be a big adjustment because Ohio State was literally last in the country, 136th out of 136 FBS teams in seconds per snap. They literally ran the slowest offense in the country, and now they're going to transition next week to a team that runs one of the fastest. So it'll be interesting to see, and that is over the season, we've kind of seen it can be a weakness of this team, and you're going to kind of have to choose snaps, pick and choose for Ruben Van and Keem Messidor. So that'll be an interesting development. But yeah, like you said, Julian saying only six sacks over the entire regular season, and Miami had five alone in that one game. And then talking about the run game that Ohio State Buckeyes had, they didn't really have one. They ran
Oh,
for 24 carries, 45 yards, 1.9 yards per carry. They made Ohio State one-dimensional, which was a huge key to this game. And they forced Sand to linger in the pocket, to having to throw, and that's where the pass rush was able to get home and thrived upon. And Bo Jackson, I mean, he was efficient. He had like 11 carries for 55 yards, but he wasn't productive. And so when you completely take out of the run game and one whole facet of the offense, that's going to pay dividends for your secondary and for your defensive line. And it's just going to be one large snowball, like I keep saying. It's excellent to see how it kind of both units are kind of complementary of one another.
Yeah, look, the saying in football a lot of the time is that you can hide a weaker secondary with a good pass rush. Because if you can
Yes.
get to the quarterback, it means your DBs don't have to cover for as long. Now, on Miami's side, I don't think they have a weak secondary at all. Their secondary is fantastic. Look at the way OJ Frederick played. I mean, he was on lockdown duty that whole game. And then you look at the numbers, Jeremiah Smith did end up having a good game, 157 receiving yards and a touchdown, but OJ got hurt, whatever you want to say. That wasn't a bad secondary on Miami. That was a weak, depleted secondary. No Damari Brown. You lost OJ about halfway through. So now you got guys coming in like Ethan O'Connor, like Xavier Lucas, who have to take that step up, who I think they did a very, very, very good job of doing so. I mean, Innis didn't really have the game. Carnell Tate, I mean, they barely mentioned his name during that game. I think he had 3 receptions for 17 yards. He did nothing. But when you get to the quarterback, it just makes life so much easier. The best teams are able to hit the quarterback, and you look at to shift over to Ole Miss a little bit and how they beat Georgia. They beat the heck out of Gunnar Stockton, man, and they hit him a lot. So it's just that's the way you win. That's the way you're able to win. And Bain and Mesidor, those are two of the scariest guys that you could see coming at you if you're a quarterback.
And you're talking about guys that hit hard. Keontae Scott, it's hard to imagine a dimension where Miami would be in the same place without him, if he was still plagued by that injury. But just the grit that this guy has shown, going down late in the season with a turf toe injury, it was projected at the time that he may not return for the rest of this campaign. But instead, he goes and seeks doctors out of state, goes up to New Jersey, gets his foot performed on so he can come back in time. He's sleeping at the facility, he's reading up on film, and he jumps a bubble screen that Jeremiah Smith can't get him to block on. And he runs it back for a pick six and probably the most impactful play of the entire evening. I mean, there were some great plays throughout that game, but that was the biggest swing of momentum. When you go up 2 scores against Ohio State, it's tough for them to come back at this point. And this guy, he was the third highest graded player on Miami that night, 85.1 pass coverage grade. And he just seemed like the most hungry player there. I mean, he was talking afterwards, all that talking on the net. But let's see what on
Yeah.
the field. This guy is just a beast.
I mean, look, in his post-game press conference, a reporter literally asked him, like, have you seen that play in film? Like, did you see that play develop? And he responds with something along the lines of, yeah, I saw it in film. And he said, and then I saw his eyes in the play, and I said, I'm gonna jump it, I'm gonna put my hands there, and it was there, and I was gone. So that's not even, yes, it's a watching film, knowing the play, knowing the design of the play, but also like you got to be hungry enough to say, you know what, I'm gonna leave my post and just send one and make the play when I got to make the play. And there's not a lot of guys who have that tenacity to be like, yeah, I'm just gonna go for it, and it pays off. It puts you up 14, and you never look back from there. And then you go on the internet after, and he said all that talking on the web. You look Ohio State fans say, well, we gifted Miami a pick six, and that changed the game. And it was like, you didn't gift a pick six. Keontae Scott got a pick, earned a pick six. And so, he's one of those guys you mentioned, goes down with the injury, not able to play those last couple games of the season where Miami needed a win against Virginia Tech, against Pitt, and then says against A&M where he probably wasn't fully healthy yet and was like, all right, I'm going to go play. I have to go play. And you see it in these playoffs between the tackles, the turnovers he's been able to force. I mean, the guy plays like a first round selection. He plays like a first round talent. Will he get that first round bid in March or April? Probably not, just because of the injury, and he's a little bit on the older side. But man, what an impactful player that the Canes brought in. I mean, shout out to Mario Cristobal for finding him, and shame on Auburn for letting him walk.
He helps Corey Heatherman out a ton by making Miami so much more versatile from a scheme perspective because he's a nickel defensive back that's essentially a third linebacker for this team without being one that Miami has to compromise their back end integrity because he can do both. He's great in pass coverage and he's great in coverage as well. I mean, he excels at both facets. He's crazy explosive speed to get to that first level and make plays. He's a weak side linebacker at the same time. I mean, he could be a QB spy on Chambliss next game without being a linebacker because he's just that explosive. And like you said, big miss by Auburn there to let him go. And this guy clearly has an axe to grind with the committee, with all those that voted against him for that Jim Thorpe award because he was the highest graded player in the entire country going into his injury. And he's proving now that he is definitely the best player at center stage.
Yeah, I mean, you took the words right out of my mouth. He is the best player at center stage from his position. And he's one of the best defensive players in the country. He's earned that right with his performance, especially in the last 2 weeks. And you mentioned, playing him more in that QB spy role. And we saw that at times this season. We saw that a little bit against Louisville. We saw that a little bit against SMU. You even saw it a lot against NC State. And that was right before he got hurt. But Keontae Scott offers you that opportunity where you don't have to lose integrity in the middle of the field because you can kind of shift him into that spy role. You put him in the second level and just let him watch, watch, watch. And then when he's got to go, he's ready to penetrate through the line and make a play. He had double-digit TFLs as a corner. Think about that. I mean, that's crazy to think about. I mean, he reminds me so much of like a Jamal Adams type of player when he was first coming out of college and started off with the Jets, and the way that he could play in the box so well. Same with Jacoby Thomas, but they play so well in the box. But Keontae's got elite coverage skills too. I mean, when you have that versatile of a guy on defense, it's like having two guys playing out there.
And talking about this offensive line too, equally as dominant. 15% pressure rate to Carson Beck. We know how well he operates in a clean pocket, and that's what Miami was giving him all night. Maui Noah, once again, sensational. No really surprise there. Second highest graded player, only behind Ruben Bain. Had Keada Jackson Jr. and Caden Curry swallowed off the edge the entire night. So much so that Caden Curry was speaking blasphemy afterwards, saying that
Oh
they
yeah,
beat Miami 9 times out of 10. No shot,
no
dude.
shot,
You lost the
no
line of
shot.
scrimmage 100 times out of 100 if you played that game again.
Yeah, no chance. I mean, that was just I don't know who media trained him and who said, you should go and say this, but that is just something you should not say, not after the performance that CC Maui Noah had against you in that game. And the play again that sticks with me because it was so impactful at that moment in the game was that tunnel screen, the CJ
Yep.
coming out of the 2 minute timeout. And the only reason that he's able to get a first down and more on that play is one, because Malachi Tony kicks out and makes a heck of a block on the perimeter, and CC Maui Noah takes about 6 steps to his right and makes a monster block on the linebacker that opens the hole. I mean, the guy is all season we've been saying he's the top 10 talent. It's just incredible to see on the field. Like it's so obvious that this is a kid that has that potential to be a day one starter in the NFL.
And he and the rest of this O line just opened up everything for the run game, which was the biggest shock to me considering Ohio State had one of the best run defenses going into this game, only allowing 78 yards per game on the ground. And Miami just tore them apart with Mark Fletcher. He had 90 yards alone, 19 carries, 4.7 yards per carry. I mean, he's played like a man possessed over the last 2 games. Two of the most stingy defenses in the country in A&M and Ohio State, and 38 touches for 287 yards and a touchdown. This guy has been phenomenal, and he's going to be the key to Miami if they can keep winning. Marty Brown as well. I mean, these guys worked in tandem. Marty Brown, by the way, taking a back seat over the last couple months. And now here he is once again. Never really left that full form that he was in since about that Florida game where he was phenomenal. Comes up clutch down the stretch on the final drive. 5 carries for 26 yards, 5.2 yards per carry. That game clinching touchdown. Miami knows how to use their backs. Gerard Pringle even mixed in there a little bit. And it's going to be one of the best running back tandems in the country next year with both Fletcher and Pringle returning. And it is just exciting to see because I think that they can dominate Ole Miss in this way if these guys can continue just playing up to the level that they've been playing.
Well, look, when you look back at the A&M game and the thing that worked the most for Miami, which is something that a lot of fans kind of had gripes about earlier on in the season, was that inside running between the tackles. Mark Fletcher was dominant right up the middle. He was running halfback dive for 10 yards. I mean, these were draw plays that he was going for double-digit yardage on. And then again, you look at the game against Ohio State, and yes, maybe there wasn't as many explosive, 20 plus yard plays. I think the longest play from scrimmage was a 19-yard run he had in the fourth. But again, the way that these tackles are able to kind of just spread that hole and he can go right through, it's one of the most incredible things that I've seen throughout these playoffs. And now when I take a look ahead at this Ole Miss team and the weakness I see for the first time all playoffs in one of Miami's opponents, I see weakness in the interior line. You look at the way Georgia was able to succeed against Ole Miss, and it was running right up the middle. The first 2 touchdowns of the game were Gunnar Stockton on QB draws. Think about that. So if you're gonna like Gunnar Stockton, who is a dog, and I mean the kid plays his heart out and
He's a
puts his head
gamer.
is going. I mean, big gamer. But there's a big difference between what, 6'1", 220 Gunnar Stockton and 6'3", 260 Mark Fletcher running downhill at you. I mean, that's just one of those things where I think, maybe it's going to be a little bit more of the Mark Fletcher, Marty Brown kind of grounded pound tandem that we saw the first 4 weeks of the season.
This feels like a game coming up where both teams are going to be able to score, but it depends on which team can control the game and can control the tempo that's going to come out on top. And I think Miami has a very good chance of doing that if they can establish the ground game, which they're able to do so against much harder interior lines, like you said, much harder secondaries that were able to get down to that first level. That's not really the case with Ole Miss. Now, sure, they do have a way better quarterback than I'd say Miami has faced over the last two rounds, in a really exciting offense that I think is the second best in yards per game in the entire country. But this feels like a lot like Florida State to me, whereas Ohio State was like Florida. That's my comparison. I'm feeling good, but there's still a lot to, still prepare for. And Carson Beck, I think, will be a big factor in this game as well. Same with Malachi Tony, because I expect him to be more of a truck than the trailer for Miami's offense that he's been over the past two rounds. This guy could explode, I think. And you saw it in this game, by the way. He was perfect in my opinion. I mean, he went 19 for 26, 138 yards, one touchdown, nothing spectacular, but his scrambling ability, showing up when needed, lowering that shoulder that he just had
Oh,
surgery
yeah.
on to make such a gritty play that all of his team was just kind of galvanized behind. This is a guy that has all the trust of his team. He's playing with confidence now, and it's going to be exciting to see over these next few rounds.
Look, Carson Beck so far through the first two rounds hasn't had to be an elite quarterback. Not like Trinidad Chambliss had. I mean, Trinidad against Georgia had to throw for 350 yards and four touchdowns for them to win that game.
Yeah.
Carson Beck threw for 138 on 25 pass attempts and a score. That's all he had to do. And then against Texas A&M, he didn't even have 100 yards passing. But again, like we mentioned, that's what happens when you can run the ball effectively in the playoffs. But now you look ahead, this is one of those games where, yes, you got to establish the run. If you can run the ball, again, you're going to have a very, very good day. But Carson Beck, looking at the way he's performed kind of throughout the season, and the one thing that I don't want to say scares me, but kind of, is in the back of my head a little bit, is this game is eerily similar to the games like everyone's been saying against
Yep.
Louisville and against SMU, which were teams that play a very high motor offense. They play quick snaps. They release the ball very quickly. Trinidad Chambliss has the quickest release in college football this year when you look at timing. And, these are offenses that Miami has struggled defensively to stay with at times. And then Carson Beck, as the favored team, sometimes kind of look like I'm going to turn into a gunslinger and just throw it, which as a guy, when I'm looking at my quarterback, I love to see that. I love to see a guy who's going to say, you know what, I trust my guys on the outside and I trust myself to put it where it needs to be. But at the same time, it's a different beast in the playoffs. And so far, he's been able to be level headed, cool, calm, and collected, whatever you want to call it, through the first two games. I just want to see more of that smart, high IQ play that we've seen from Beck over the last 2 weeks coming up in the Fiesta Bowl against Ole Miss, rather than kind of what that kind of gamer mentality that he tried to show against SMU and Louisville.
In the psychological perspective on Thursday is going to be really interesting because you had the option of either playing Ole Miss or Georgia. And I feel that Miami might have benefited from that underdog mentality they would have gotten if they had Georgia up on the slate. Because you come into that game as kind of this team that's projected to be the underdog, projected to lose, coming up against this big bad team of the SEC that's this national powerhouse, very similar to Ohio State. Instead, you're playing Ole Miss, a team that it's kind of hard not to root for. They feel like a team of destiny. They've overcome so much adversity over the season. They lost their head coach in Lane Kiffin and still have advanced past the first two rounds of the college football playoff. They are a team that had a D2 quarterback transfer in, started mid-season, and is now lighting the world on fire, including the SEC. And so it is kind of interesting. But if you look at it conversely, maybe on the positive for Miami, at least Carson Beck doesn't have to go through the mental anguish of the week-long narratives and storylines of playing his former team. That would have been kind of stupid, in my opinion, the Beck Bowl, they were calling it. So at least he doesn't have to go through that. And I think maybe more just on the Miami perspective of it alone, talking about the Fiesta Bowl in general, Miami has some demons to exercise because they are currently 0-4 in the Fiesta Bowl all time with some pretty bad memories. You had the Penn State National Championship. Vinny Testaverde had his worst game of his career, threw for 5 interceptions. That lost him the game. They lost to UCLA before that. lost to the famous Desert Swarm defense, absolutely annihilated by Arizona. And then, of course, the most faithful one of it all, probably the most memorable Fiesta Bowl of all time, the loss to Ohio State. Now, maybe if there is a silver lining here, that was all in Sun Devil Stadium, and that this game that is long gone. We are
Long
now
gone.
State Farm Stadium, so hopefully that is a good sign. And that's kind of just the narrative part of it. But there's some interesting factors thinking about it from a narrative perspective.
And again, like you mentioned, Beck not having to deal with that whole Beck Bowl kind of
Yeah.
narrative that was going on, and that's a big help. One, two, these are, in my opinion, the two best stories in college football right now. Miami barely getting in by the skin of their teeth, according to the committee, and getting thrown in there at literally the last second as a team. And now two big upsets, and they have a chance to go, compete for a national championship on their own home turf. Crazy story. And then Ole Miss, they lose Lane Kiffin the week before the playoffs. And is he going to let his guys stay and keep coaching? Is he not? Now, some of them are doing double duty between LSU and Ole Miss. A D2 quarterback that's playing D1. Like you said, it's hard to not root for Ole Miss. And what a story they have been all season long, and how fun it's been to watch them go 12-1. But when you go into this game, I think that you kind of have to put your head on the side of the guys who have been there before. Carson Beck, although he didn't start, has been there before. He is a two-time national champion at Georgia. And yes, he sat behind Stetson Bennett, but he was there. He knows what it's like to be in those games. And then again, you look at some of these guys on Miami who are just a little bit more in tone, I think, with the D1 game. Now, Trinidad Chambliss, I can't harp on the guy at all, because you watch what he did against Georgia, and that was one of the best quarterback performances we've seen in college football in my recent memory. I mean, the kid looked incredible, but there was weakness shown. I mean, how many times did his O-line completely get disarrayed with pressure? And he had to scramble. He had that one play where he scrambled back 20 yards and somehow gets that backhanded flip pass out to his running back, who's able to get the first down. Now, how long are you going to be able to rely on that magic in the playoffs, especially against a team like Miami, who I think if they get through that line, they're not going to let you run around. There's too many athletes, pure athletes on that line that can get to you.
Yeah, absolutely. Miami's playing with house money, but they are going for it all. And so now we will step aside to interview Roman from the Orange Bowl Boys podcast to break down this game even further on Thursday. It's going to be a fireworks show, and we're all excited to see it. Luca, you'll be at home for it. You'll be at campus at the University of Miami. I'll be covering media for it, but I'm so excited, man. All right, let's get to this interview. Okay, we now welcome on Roman Marciante of the famous Orange Bowl Boys podcast covering Miami Hurricanes football year round. Ro, thank you so much for taking the time to join us in the late hours of the night. I know it's unusual, but we thank you for being here with us. We know you just did your student of the game film analysis for the Ole Miss breakdown coming up on Thursday. But before we head to that, we just want to get your final reactions from this monumental win, probably the most important win for Miami in the last 24 years on Thursday night of New Year's Eve. What impressed you the most from Miami, both either on the offensive or defensive side after watching the tape?
Ohio State Buckeyes, this one's for you. Terry Porter could not save you from what came. And what I was the most impressed with, you won emphatically along the line of scrimmage. Defensively, offensively, and it goes back, boys, Liam, Luca. It goes back to when Mario Cristobal had his press conference, and he said, I'm going to build it in the trenches. I'm going to build it from the inside out. And when you needed to beat the Ohio State Buckeyes, you had to beat them from the inside out, because outside, they had a little bit of an advantage, right? Jeremiah Smith, that's an advantage for them. Without that particular player from South Florida, who knows what the score would have been. And then you look at it in terms of their DBs, number one defensive secondary in the country. So what impressed me most after watching that film review, just how emphatically we dominated the line of scrimmage at times. It was impressive.
And going into this Ole Miss matchup, we should expect more of the same from the line of scrimmage. Ole Miss seems physically inferior on both sides of the ball. But just right now, talking about what presents itself from this game going forward, because from a talent standpoint, Georgia is probably the better football team out of Georgia and Ole Miss in the Sugar Bowl. But from a psychological and scheming perspective, I think Ole Miss is probably the tougher team here because Miami does seem to perform better as the underdog. And Ole Miss's offense is also built in a way that can eliminate Miami's edge rushers because they get the ball out so quick. So, in a perfect world, would you rather face Ole Miss or Georgia in this next round in the semifinals?
I thought it was destiny to face Georgia. I
Yeah.
kind of wish we were facing Georgia because the storyline writes itself. But there is a caveat here, and you can seek solace, especially if you are following along the storyline. Because going to Kyle Field, beating Texas A&M on the road in front of 106,000, then following that up, beating the defending national champions in the Ohio State Buckeyes, then defeating Georgia, and then you were like, well, let's finish it off at home and beat Oregon for a national championship. I mean, that was the storyline, right? We have a little divergence, a little fork in the road. And what's potentially going to happen, though, Carson Beck gets to have his revenge. It's just in a different fashion because Georgia couldn't pull it off. Georgia, when it mattered, just couldn't make enough plays. So Carson Beck goes ahead and goes into the national championship, beating the team that beat his former team. I think he can smile. I think he won't say it publicly, but privately in his soul, in that soul door when he knocks on it, I think he's going to relish in the fact I beat the team that you couldn't beat. I got farther than you allowed me to go. So I think the storyline's still there. Now, to answer your question, yeah, you know what? Ole Miss, a lot of trouble. You know, that quarterback's the most Cam Ward-esque thing that I've seen in my student of the game this season. It's fun to watch him. I had to tip my cap on one of the plays. I'm like, this is the most Cam Ward thing I've seen. But they come in. I will give them the credit that their quarterback is the most Cam Ward-esque thing that I've seen on the student of the game film review this season. But I will also say that their defense gives me the same vibes as our defense did a year ago. So it's ultimately going to come down to can their defense, right? Because down the backstretch, our offense was remarkably good, right? When it mattered, we were 4-1 in November. We started off 0-1 in November. We had that like perplexity where we had 5 games in November, but we finished it 4-0 to finish 4-1 in November. And it started because we had bag plays for days and we looked very creative on offense and we were clicking on all cylinders. So here we go. I feel like you're facing the 2025 Miami Hurricanes, and I'll make the prediction against the 2024 Miami Hurricanes, where they have the better offense, not the great defense. And we flipped it. We have the greater defense than we do the better offense.
Yeah, and I mean that's a really interesting way to put it to kind of play it back to what we were as a team last year. I mean, even in the way that they kind of run their offense, it's eerily similar. You know what I mean? Last year we played a little bit quicker brand of football than we do offensively this year, I feel like. And then you look at a guy like Trinidad who, you know, he's getting the ball out one of the quickest release times in college football this year. So, you know, what do you see? Could that give Miami's front seven on the D line kind of some trouble just because of how quick they play? It's kind of eerily similar to what Miller Moss and Louisville did earlier this year, even what Kevin Jennings and SMU did when they beat us on earlier in the season.
Yeah, I mean, those are the two prep pieces that you're going to look to, and they both ended up, unfortunately for the University of Miami Hurricanes, when they faced similar offenses to what you're looking at Ole Miss, they ended in L's. However, I keep giving credit and I keep getting egg on my face for this credit, but thank you to the ACC. It is a great coached league. We're big fans of Rhett Lashley, are we not? He has prepped us for what is about to happen. We have seen similar. What Louisville, credit Miller Moss. Credit that game plan. That negated a lot of the Miami Hurricane pass rush. I think most teams should probably borrow that. Ohio State got a little cocky in the first quarter, and then we're like, oh, these guys are for real, and then had to adapt and chip some and do some. I think Miami's going to be prepared for it. I really, really do. And Ole Miss just can't get into the habit of what happened last year. If we can get you off the field, just have the right execution and play calls, maybe bat a ball down at the line of scrimmage, because that's going to be the bigger premium, right? If you're not going to allow to be at the quarterback's doorstep for sacks, maybe you can bat a ball. Maybe you can get an incompletion. Maybe you could just go ahead and stuff a run, a traditional run. You're going to have to do those things to kind of keep them off schedule, because the last thing Ole Miss needs is to not convert enough third downs and then let our trench bullies on our side, because it is going to feel like the leg weights are off after you've just played Ohio State in the trenches. Yeah. Because when you flip on consecutive films, and they're both up there on the Orange Bowl Boys channel, and you can watch during the game, you're going to just see the speed difference and the trench difference immediately. And I had that organic opportunity to do both back to back, which usually doesn't happen. When you see it, that's why Mario said, this is the best team that Miami's going to face. He had to say that. He had to say that because when the film flipped on from what they just saw, they're going to be like, we're going to kill this team by 21 points.
Yep.
And you can't come in too confident because Trinidad has the ability to play like Cam Ward, play above his potential, bring his team along for the ride. And we saw how successful Miami was last year when they had a Cam Ward equivalency.
And I mean, the Trinidad story this year, I mean, that's just to give him his, round of applause, give him his flowers. The D2 comes in now, D1 for this first year, doesn't start as the starter, ends up halfway through the season, they throw him into the fire and he leads them into the playoffs. And I mean, just that performance against Georgia last week, he looked untouchable. I mean, now for you look at the film and you look at what you've seen from Trinidad and his growth as a quarterback and his progression as a quarterback over this season. And, is there something you're kind of honing in on with his game that you think either could hurt the Hurricanes or maybe something that they could probably take advantage of that people really aren't seeing so far?
Great question. I think the University of Miami, not only do they have to account for him as far as a runner, but they have to account for him on the rollout game. Had an organic conversation. I was on the road and they were like, yeah, I remember him at Ferris State, and Ferris State loves to roll the pocket.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what they're accustomed to. So score a touchdown against Georgia, roll in the pocket. Later on in the game, they roll the pocket. So I need to see the University of Miami have a good game plan for when they have their role plays, and you have to apply Patrick Mahomes rules. And what's Patrick Mahomes rules? That is, once he's outside the pocket, you're going to have to pick a poison. And the poison I'd rather drink at that moment, okay, chunk us up in the run game, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Because if we don't get deeper than the deep, then you're going to just go ahead and just flick it for 60 yards. And that is the bigger of the two evils. So the plan in the game plan, what are they going to do on the roll? And when the play breaks down, have a plan for that too, because his scramble drill is ruthlessly effective, and it was against Georgia.
Yeah.
And the thing is, too, this guy can chuck the ball. I mean, he's been known for his accuracy all season, but what that game against Georgia showed is that this guy has the range. He has the accuracy downfield, 20 yards plus, to really let that thing fly. And that's what's kind of scary because Miami's come up against many mobile quarterbacks throughout the season, especially most recently Marcel Reed. But the problem with him was that, yes, he was so talented on the ground with his legs, but he did not have that same accuracy while throwing or that same arm talent as well. So this is a whole different animal, probably the most dangerous quarterback left in this college football playoff, if we're all being honest. But there is another player that Ole Miss has on offense too that may be equally as dangerous, and that's Kewan Lacey. Does he significantly impress you as a guy that could give Miami's defensive line fits or at the line of scrimmage, or does he appear that he can be contained? Because his numbers are pretty interesting because he was a Doak Walker finalist. Obviously, Jeremiah Love won that award, and Miami bottled him up for 59 scrimmage yards total in that game. And he does, I think, is one of the leaders in the country in touchdowns, has about 23. But it seems that all comes in short yardage situations. And actually, against top 10 teams, he's not had a single game above 100 yards. Against LSU, he had 3.8 yards per carry. His first game against Georgia, he was absolutely obsolete. I mean, he went 12 for 31, 2.6 yards per carry. Against Oklahoma, another very stingy defense, just like Miami's, 27 for 78, 2.9 yards per carry. So he does seem to be heating up, however. I mean, he just had an awesome game after that fumble that led to a touchdown. After that, he was lights out. But from what you've been seeing on film, is he the real deal?
Here's the thing that doesn't bode well for Ole Miss, because how they like to utilize him and how they like to use him as like a zone runner off that zone read game and try to kind of like implement him as an addendum piece. I mean, he's a primary piece as well, but you use that in tandem between the quarterback. The University of Miami has done a phenomenal job against zone style rushes this year. If they have an issue, it's when they do gap insert plays and they're leaving this big B gap bubble. I highlighted that. When they do that, I feel like we've been able to get chunked up. One of the more creative wrinkles on the zone read is when we played Virginia Tech. So I see that Ole Miss could probably borrow some of those fold kind of tendencies that they used on the zone read, because that was the only one. But you go back to NC State, we had Hollywood, right? Yeah. We bottled him up even more. Yeah. And it was the same thing. We've heard this on the year. I feel confident for the University of Miami's aspect and ability to take away number one running backs. Just the same way that, Texas A&M was really good taking away number one wide receivers, and Malachi Tony really didn't factor that well. I mean, it was a windy ball game in itself. But in the same breath, I like the University of Miami's ability to take away number one running backs. I think we have an advantage there. And I wouldn't necessarily say it would probably go sideways if he's rushing for over 100 yards against this Miami. Now, do I feel like they could get over 100 yards in tandem with the quarterback? Of course, especially one broken play can lead to 30 yards. Yeah. But it's going to be a monumentally challenging perspective for them if they think this is going to happen all night long, because that's notoriously not been the case. And the University of Miami defense is getting better down the backstretch, and they're getting more wrinkly assassin. Okay. I just made up a term, but they're adding some wrinkles to wrinkles, and they're doing some things that are that are giving opposing offenses fits.
Yeah, and I mean, going on to Ole Miss's defensive side of the ball, because we spoke a lot about their offense with Trinidad and, of course, Kiwan. But their defense, how do you think they match up, their defensive front seven against Miami's offensive line and that front seven that we have? I mean, when I look at the film, I look at, yes, they got 4 sacks on Gunnar Stockton against Georgia, and they batted 4 balls down at the line, and they had 2 or 3 big hits on him. But again, that Georgia O-line is not the same as this Miami O-line, at least when I look at the film and the way Miami's been able to be dominant in protecting Carson Beck this year. So kind of just what your thoughts are on, can Ole Miss, you think Ole Miss is going to put Carson Beck into more pressure situations than he's seen so far throughout this playoff run? Or do you think that Miami O-line kind of holds steady?
I think the offensive line holds steady. I'm going to just speak the part and say this is the best team that the University of Miami will face all year. You have to say it. You have to give you respect. I just have to look at it from the perspective that they lived in a lot of 3-man pressure fronts. Their plan was, let's just go ahead and throw as many people in the backfield to kind of keep it and muddy up the water, which I feel gives us even more of an advantage with our offensive line. I thought that Texas A&M came in with better blitz packages, so I didn't really see them against Georgia as this heavy blitz profile team either. So I think the University of Miami can have its way. The way that their defensive line presents, they were getting blown off the ball at times by Georgia, relatively easy. Yep. And I feel that given the chance, right, it's just one of those things where it's as fighters coming in, I know if I punch this guy enough times, with a hook down low, I know he's going to drop his left, guard just a little bit more. Yeah. And then here comes the hook to the face. Yep. They look susceptible there. They look like, given the chance, University of Miami will try to run you out of the building. You are signaling all the signals. I'm watching D tackles get pushed off the ball. I'm watching a couple other guys shy into contact. I'm watching guys not fit from the second level well. I'm watching guys not tackle well. You are showing all the markers to getting knocked out in the run game. All right. Now, whether or not you come in with a game plan that game and your guys play possessed and they play above their potential in the rush game, because we know what they are. They're giving up, I believe, over 150 yards on the ground. Yeah. They show the capability of being knocked out in a run game. Miami's going to at least see that. But at the same point, if they live in their 3-man pressure series and drop 8 a lot of times, which still kind of gives you an advantage in a run game, in my opinion. But Carson Beck, that's going to be key for me. When you notice that they're only rushing 3, take your time, throttle down. You got all the time in the world.
You're going to have a lot of time.
So those are the things that really jumped out to me. So I think the University of Miami, the first 2 weeks, I think this will probably be their best offensive performance in the playoffs so far. I think they're going to have many opportunities for either big plays or in the run game. This is the best team we'll play in the playoffs.
Yeah, got to say it. SEC.
The SEC, of course.
But so just to get your final prognostication on this, I think the main sentiment around the Miami fans is that Carson Beck is due for a big game coming up. I think this is a chance where both him and Malachi can shine. He's going to have so much time and space in the pocket. But then should they maybe temper their expectations just a little bit, because Miami at the same time wants to go on these long, sustained drives to keep the ball out of Chambliss's hands. And we know that Miami can likely pound Ole Miss with their run game. So will it be more, once again, of a pedestrian game where he kind of just manages the clock? Once again, that's all you can really ask for if it results in a win. But should this game really be a game where we could expect plus 200 yards, multiple passing touchdowns, or should we just kind of pump the brakes a little bit and say, okay, let's just try to work with what we got here. We know how to beat them is through the run, so should we just let it go through there right now with Mark Fletcher and Gerard Pringle and Marty Brown and all these backs that Miami has?
Liam, that's a great question, and I'm gonna tell it to you like this way: we're going to the Olympics, right? And we're walking up, and we have two things: we either have track shoes or we have swimming trunks. We're either gonna go head to the pool or we're gonna head to a track meet. And I know which one probably benefits the University of Miami a little bit more is if we go ahead and put on our swim trunks and we drag them to the deep end of the pool and we body blow them and we bludgeon them into the pool to the point where they don't want to breathe. They got to get their little swimmies, and we're just going to continuously run them out in 7-minute, 8-minute drives, super effective, have some bag plays for days to keep things interesting, but we maintain the ball and we just keep ourselves in that area of the pool. Or are they just going to go ahead and jump on us and they're going to force us into a track meet? Because that's when things get a little bit dicey, because that's when defenses can get tired. That's when rotations are going to start to matter. So you're coming up to this Olympic Village with shorts and track shoes. Give me the shorts. I want to go to the pool. All right. And I'm a fun offensive guy. I love offense, right? But I knew last year too, we had the offense to win a national championship. We didn't have the defense.
Yep.
We were right. I said we didn't need the super effective offense to get further because the age-old adage always wins, right? Defense wins, running game wins. That's what wins championships, right? Defensive. We know that. Give me the shorts. Give me the shorts, buddy. You see, you're the younger generations. You guys wear like the shorter shorts too. The board shorts for me, I'm comfortable there. I got more of a body for like those larger. I need those shorts. Let's go drag them into the deep end of the pool.
So, I mean, now if we're going to talk about it like that, we're going to say, all right, let's drag them into the deep end. For Miami, when you're looking at impact guys that are going to have a big role in this game. Of course, I'm gonna assume you're gonna say Mark Fletcher is one of them because I mean what he's done the last 2 weeks, and now if you're expecting to pound them through the run. But other than Fletch, what are some guys you think are really gonna have a big game on the side of Miami for them to get a victory and advance the national championship, or even guys that we didn't mention on Ole Miss that you think could cause a little bit of rumblings in the Miami camp this week?
I'm going to stick on the Miami side there because when I do my student of the game, I'm very, very courteous to the opposing team, but I do it purposely because I'm like, that guy, that receiver, that quarterback. I try not to use names, right? I know our guys, of course. This could be a game where you see Pringle get a little bit more touches, only for the fact that I don't see Ole Miss didn't seem like a blitz-heavy team, and as long as you're not relying on Pringle in terms of, a lot of pass pro sets, because Ohio State, once they saw him in, they kind of went to him. He went the wrong way in pass pro, not to call the young man out. And after that, I didn't see him again. But in this situation, he gets that squared away. They're not really a heavy blitz team. He gets the ball. He's got a lot of speed because down the backstretch, when you had Marion on the field, when you had Pringle on the field, and when you had Malachi Tony, I thought that was your biggest mismatch that you gave people in terms of speed. They had a hard time covering people with linebackers. They had hard. So I could see that way. Yeah, I said, let's go to the pool. But when we put our track shoes on too, we could get quite fast ourselves. So I see that emerging. And you know what? CJ Daniels is just one of those dudes too. It's just quietly, especially in the run game and just how he's been able, that clutch against Ohio State, that screen. By the way, that was the same screen that scored against Florida State.
Yeah.
Same one.
False pull tunnel screen.
Yeah, the same one that scored. So that's another one of those guys that he can taste it as well. So I think on the offensive side of the ball, you're going to see another wide receiver too. And I'll make this sneaky prediction that, like against Ole Miss, I think Pringle's going to get another shot. True freshman. I think that speaks volumes too for the University of Miami. You have true freshman Malachi Tony, true freshman Gerard Pringle in there doing some damage. So I think those two guys are probably going to hit.
And then kind of just zooming out now from the macro side of it, 100,000-foot view, let's look at the storylines here. More on Ole Miss side, because another key point that could potentially be a big factor in this game is the distractions both teams are facing heading into this. Miami right now completely 100% aligned. All their coaching staff is on the same page. Not the same story for Ole Miss. They have this huge Lane Kiffin saga that's been plaguing them this entire postseason. They've been handling the adversity really well, but still it's becoming a big factor, especially now with the transfer portal having opened up a few days ago. They have a lot of their offensive staff already traveling over to Baton Rouge to kind of work on things for the LSU Tigers. So how do you think that may come into effect here in this game, if at all? Because what might be important to keep in mind here is that the past two teams Ole Miss has played, Tulane and Georgia, were teams that they saw in the regular season as a rematch. So this is going to be a whole different animal in terms of a preparation standpoint because they're scrambling right now with all their coaches. It seems that only Charlie Weiss may be the actual only coach that's fully designated and locked in on this game. Will that maybe play a factor in terms of preparation for this game?
For them, they have that extra motivation. I
Yeah.
look at it in a unique perspective because I say, okay, that's cute. Your coach left you. That's not a storyline. That's a soap opera. And that's exactly what Lane Kiffin has done to the Ole Miss Rebels. He's turned their improbable run with a great team into a soap opera. And you bring up an interesting point. Yeah, we're not a rematch, and we are like a throwback. We are a throwback SEC team. For some reason, we're going to beat you in the trenches. We're talking about a running game. What are we talking about here? Like a 2015 Alabama team? Like what? Like this is what the University of Miami is. This is what the University of Miami is built for. So while you have the flash and dash and all the cameras and all these people talking about your storyline, you could just end up being a next cute thing for the University of Miami to play with for the better part of 60 minutes. I feel confident going into this game. And you're right. We're lockstep and key. And I think at this point, what is the bigger storyline? Oh, your coach left you? Oh, poor you. Or the fact that the University of Miami can play balls to the wall, play their best ball late, and go finish with a home game. I say that's the bigger storyline. I think that's the better storyline for the kids to get their attention. Let's just play out of our minds for the next 120 minutes of our life and let the chips fall where they may. We got 120 minutes left, boys. And it starts with them. It starts with them. They're so defunct, their coach didn't even want to stay with them. That's what he felt about them, right? Let's just, I mean, the storyline can write itself if you want to be the bully here. But like, all right, guess what? He's not here. Where's Lane? And you look back on it because when Mario Cristobal was hired, the other name that was very popular at the time was Lane Kiffin. And I think looking at this now, fast forward, for all the bumps that Mario's taken, wow, Miami's in a much better spot because he's the more steadfast approach. He's the more culturally significant. He was going to be the bedrock that Miami needed, where I feel Lane Kiffin was always going to be that quicksand. And I feel bad for the Ole Miss Rebels because they're a talented team and they're in an improbable run themselves, and they have an opportunity to win a national championship, and they haven't won one outright ever. And it's all going to be lost because all you keep hearing is about Lane Kiffin and his moral bankruptcy and just leaving those kids high and dry. So I have a different perspective of that.
And then kind of just wrapping things up with you, we just talked about that Ole Miss storyline, whatever you want to call it. Miami's kind of got their own storyline and their own going right now. Last team in, they were on the bubble right up until the end. They get put in at the very last second, and now it's kind of been that redemption tour tear through the college football playoff up until this moment against Ole Miss. And I mean, now if Miami can come out for 60 minutes and just get a win, get back to that national championship stage, would you say that theoretically that is a bigger win than the Ohio State win was in terms of, significance for the program? Or do you still think that win against Ohio State and kind of that whole revenge for 2002 kind of takes the cake in what's been a great tear for Mario Cristobal and his guys over the past month?
I think that in order for that Ohio State win to cement itself as one of the greatest wins in Miami Hurricane history, you got to remember the greatness is way before your time. You got to remember the greatest upset that the world of sports has ever known is when a little United States college hockey team beat the Russians.
Yeah,
okay, Miracle on Ice. What a lot of people don't realize, a lot of people did watch the movie, that wasn't the final game.
Right. That was the semifinal.
That Miracle on Ice needed to go play another game. They were down in that game too, and they won the gold medal.
Yep.
For that to be our Miracle on Grass, the University of Miami has to finish its business the next two games. Then that win cements itself as one of the greatest 10-point underdogs on the road. When God made Notre Dame number 1 and Miami made them number 13. Yes, we improbably went in. We were underdogs on the road in front of 106,000. It was like the 300 against a Spartan army. The winds were swirling around in hellacious efficacy. We stood toe-to-toe and all those rebel-yelling weirdos, and we took them down only to face the defending national champions and their huge ego, and Terry Porter couldn't save them. And then we just need to continue the trend, right? We need to continue the trend. We need to finish off in our home stadium, and then it becomes our destiny because that's where we live. That's the ultimate pool we want to finish in. Yep. We want to have a celebratory dive into our home turf as national champions, number 6. And then for guys like me who witnessed Terry Porter rob us, then I can say, you know what? Maybe I can finally put that to bed because we got number 6 en route to beating the Russians. Yeah. Because make no bones about it. I don't care what you say. That will be the most talented team you will play. But Ole Miss is the most talented team we're going to play.
Yeah, I mean, it would be poetic justice. That game against Ohio State, that was the reemergence of Miami as a national brand, as a national powerhouse in this new modern NIL era. It was a changing of the guard moment. Georgia, Alabama, and Ohio State all knocked out within the 2 days of each other on the same weekend. That's college football for you right there in this new modern age where the playing field is leveled. Ro, thank you so much for taking the time to talk with us. This was awesome. Miami advances, and Mario's vision is no longer theoretical, right? This is now a reality, and they're playing with house money. They've gone to the casino, and they are cashing in right now at the blackjack table, and we are hoping they do not stop. And the next test is waiting in just a couple days on Thursday against Ole Miss. Thank you so much for joining us, and as always, go Canes.